Good afternoon. I am delighted to welcome you here to our talk by James Murray, Senior Engineer with Waterford City and County Council, who is going to ask the question for us: active travel, are our communities ready? So James is joined by his colleague Ian Ludlow, who will keep an eye on the chat. So pop any questions into the chat function there that you might have. So the presentation itself is going to last about 20 minutes. So we're going to record that bit so we can share it with you afterwards. We'll also share the slides with you, and then we'll have 10 minutes at the end for a discussion. So I'm going to hand you over to James. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Afternoon, everyone. I presume that I think the screen is shared now. So afternoon, everyone. I just want to thank Sinead firstly for the invitation to talk. My name is James Murray. As Sinead said, I'm Senior Engineer with Waterford City County Council on the Active Travel Program. And I suppose what I want to do today is to bring you through what the Active Travel Program is, what it isn't, give you some background on the funding and on policy without going into too much detail and boring you. And I'll also look at the stated benefits of the programme. We look briefly at the proposed programme for Waterford County over the next 5 years, and that's some of the existing infrastructure that we hope to build on. And finally, I want to discuss the concept of permeability, which I think is a particularly important programme for our existing urban areas. And I suppose I'd say at the outset, I don't pretend to be an expert in this area. I suppose I'm 6 months in the post that I'm in. But certainly at this stage, the challenges of changing people's habits to include active travel are certainly coming to the fore, even though it's a very, very simple concept. So I suppose we'll just look at this quote, and it's real, it's not fake news. And I suppose, when you look at it, I believe this initiative serves little purpose. The only benefit is for children to travel to school. And that's a submission I suppose we received on a proposed pedestrian crossing point, which was already informally used. And I suppose when you come up against this and you're looking to see how can you make progress, I think you need to try and understand it, where it comes from. I think you need to not judge it too harshly. And I think you need to be patient as well, because times are certainly changing. And you also need to judge when you go around it, both literally and figuratively. So what is active travel? Like it's an extremely simple concept, really. And I suppose the basis of it is you don't take a 4-ton SUV 1,500 meters up the road for a pint of milk and a scone. We've built the car into our daily lives, into school runs, into local trips, into services that are within a 15-minute walk or less of a cycle from where we live. We built our infrastructure to reflect this. We've had 50 years prioritising the car as a mode of transport. And we've done that because of the convenience that it provides to us, or so we thought. We've placed convenience of the car above all else, and let's be honest, we're going to be very, very slow to give up that convenience. So if you look at gov.ie, you'll see active travel defined as travelling with a purpose, and it's not a phrase that I particularly like, but it's there, and I suppose it has some relevance. Active travel infrastructure, the infrastructure that goes with that, it's infrastructure that enables commuters to travel under their own physical energy on their daily commute. It includes, amongst other things, footpaths on and off road cycle tracks, pedestrian and cycle friendly junctions and roundabouts, and we have loads of examples of the absolute opposite. Examples of active travel are walking as part of your commute to work or your commute to school, cycling to the shop, scooting, kids scooting, roller skating to school. These are the active travel activities that we want to try and promote. Walking and cycling purely as a leisure activity is not an active travel program, and I suppose that's important in respect to the application of the funding model and what types of schemes we can bring forward as a local authority that qualify for funding. Active travel is about changing the nature of our transport system to a sustainable transport model. It is in itself, it is a climate action program. It doesn't support the status quo in respect to transport. It looks to make change, and that is one of the challenges of it, actually. Active travel investment promotes cycling over the use of the car, And I suppose the programs look to integrate with our public transport systems, our current public transport systems, and our future public transport systems. So just to delve into what active travel isn't a little bit more closely, what this guy in this picture is not active travel. This is recreational. I suppose active travel, in terms of the programs that we bring forward, they're not like for like footpath replacement. They must prioritise and promote the modal split. They're not recreational walking or recreational cycling routes. They're not greenway development programs, though some of the urban greenways on the edges of towns have that commuter element, which allows them to access funding. And I suppose what else is inside in the program is a really great Safe Routes to School program, where you start looking at the routes to schools within a kilometre of a school and try to create a safer route to school for kids. Try and create, better road crossings, better junctions, better priority for the pedestrian. We also have bus priority as part of our program, which prioritises public transport in terms of when buses come to pedestrian crossings and lights, that those traffic lights will change in their favour and buses will move through more quickly. And also, I think those in Waterford City, those of you who are living in Waterford City, will see the rollout of the City Bikes scheme through the NTA. The Active Travel Programme also has links to improved health and well-being, strengthening our communities, and it's also a great leveller with regards to this just transition in respect to climate action. I suppose these are all very, very lofty goals, and they're all seen as very positive. What's the policy background? And I suppose I don't want to lose people here in policy. I suppose the key thing in terms of active travel is it is very, very strongly underpinned now by national policy. Ireland 2040 has a number of national strategic outcomes identified, and active travel as a policy links to 5 of these national strategic outcomes, and they're listed there: compact growth, strengthened rural economies and communities, sustainable mobility, enhanced amenity and heritage, and transition to a low carbon and climate resilient society. And I suppose when you look down deeper into it, the National Planning Framework, the National Development Plan from 2018, 2017, and then into Transport Investment Policy. Transport Investment Policy now, the National Investment Framework for Transport Investment prioritises active travel above the other modes of transport. So the policy background is very, very strong. In addition to that, when you look at the current programme for government, the current programme for government commits 20% of the 2020 capital budget, which is 360 million per year for the lifetime of the government. And that is where the figure of 1.8 billion over a 5-year programme comes from. Inside that programme for government, there are a number of actions identified, and they're there on the screen in front of you. The LA is to adopt a high quality cycling policy, including cycling plans, increase the number of children walking to and from school, ramp up the cycle right training to provide cycle training in schools, and review of road traffic legislation and policy. Now, not all of those actions are for the active travel teams to look at, but it certainly underlines how strong the policy commitment is to active travel and I suppose to sustainable transport in general. So we touched on this earlier, and I suppose some of these positive effects people can debate, but in general they are almost universally quoted in policy documents here in the EU and in the UK. I suppose the first benefit that people will see in terms of active travel very, very strongly is the environmental benefit. The reduced level of fossil fuels in terms of carbon emissions from a reduced number of cars, improved air quality in the cities as a result of reduced number of vehicles, reduced environmental impacts due to reduction in actual vehicle manufacture, and reduced noise levels due to lower vehicle speeds, etc. In respect to safety, particularly for the pedestrian and for cyclists, studies have shown that an increased number of cyclists and a greater presence of cyclists makes motorists actually change their behaviours, making it safer for cyclists without actually making any other change, only putting more cyclists on the road. So I suppose once you get to a critical mass in terms of cyclists, the environment itself becomes safer because behaviours change. Also in respect to travel routes, particularly in the Safe Routes to School programme, when you start looking at the routes that kids will cycle and walk to school and start to take out the issues that they have or the decision-making points in terms of junctions and road crossings and make decisions very clear for both motorists and for pedestrians, the route to school becomes safer, and it gives parents that confidence to leave their kids cycle or walk to school. There'll be plenty of debate, I suppose, about the economic benefits, but many studies would point towards the reduced traffic congestion levels that they provide, I suppose, improved accessibility and the potential for improved amenity in our urban areas, and that people will spend longer in our urban centres and spend more in those urban centres. And there's plenty of debate around that. In terms of individual health, obviously improved levels of fitness, public health in general increasing because of the increased activity as from building exercise into your day-to-day life, and also the community development. So one of the programs that we have, which we'll talk about later, is this Permeability Program, and that has the ability to make communities feel smaller, and I think in the long run to strengthen communities, and we'll come back to that. I suppose what is going on in active travel in Waterford in particular, and it's a national programme, so I suppose every local authority is setting up their own teams. Our team is in place since July 2021, and we currently have 5 members on the team. We hope to grow up to 12, and that will move across technical, administrative and communications. There's a very well developed 5-year programme there of major capital schemes. And work will be concentrated in Waterford City, in Tramore and in Ungarvan. I suppose it is an urban programme essentially. It's 100% funded through the NTA. It currently sits inside in the Roads Directorate. There are schemes at all stages. There are schemes at all stages of planning, and we have schemes of construction, and we have in 2021 smaller schemes that are completed. And it's also assisted in its delivery by the 3 municipal district roads and by those outdoor staff. Active Travel is part of the local authority's climate action team in respect to transport emissions reductions also. We are building on the work of others in Waterford, and Waterford, I suppose, it has long held ambitions in the space of recreational active travel. We have a 42-kilometre greenway from Dungarvan to Waterford City. We have a pedestrian core in terms of the Viking Triangle, the Apple Market, Arundel Square, John Roberts Square, which is really a fantastic urban space. And also we have the Bilberry to City Centre greenway route, which is currently at construction and will be completed in early next year, and will bring the greenway essentially down onto the quays in Waterford, which would be a great amenity and a great commuter route. Just looking at what are the typical types of projects that we have, there are actually 27 separate active travel projects currently on the programme. And when you look through them, there's approximately 50 kilometres of cycle track to be delivered on that over the next 5 years. It's a very ambitious programme. It includes the provision of new and widened footpaths, segregated cycle tracks, reconstruction and the upgrade of defective tracks and footpaths, provision of new and improved and existing pedestrian crossings for pedestrians and cyclists, raised surfaces, junction tightening, zebra crossings, the provision of lighting and signalised crossings, the provision of cycle parking both short and long term, the improvement of existing and development of new permeability connection measures to support and improve the access between our local communities at a very, very local level. And that to me is the building blocks of active travel. And we also have a Safe Route to School initiative, which I spoke about, which looks to bring children and give to school more safely and give parents that confidence to let them travel to school. I suppose that brings us fairly neatly back to the original quote. And I suppose when you look through what I've spoken for the last 5 minutes, everything sounds great, but where do we go from here, you know? I suppose one element of the programme which we'll be anxious to make progress on very early on is the creation of these local routes, this greater permeability in the local environment. In many cases, these are routes that are already used informally. I suppose kids taking shortcuts, jumping walls, cutting through green areas, placing wheelie bins strategically against certain walls so they can get up on the wheelie bin first and then get up on the wall into a sports field, into a school, over to the shop or to see a friend. And this programme looks to develop these routes into formal routes, into cycling and walking routes, routes to school and to other services. And I suppose very simply put, it's about creating the most direct route to services and providing these shorter routes for the informal local trips. Just very, very quickly, we'll look at some potential schemes that I suppose we've looked at ourselves. This is a scheme in Ballon Road, and it looks to create new routes across a local community through the development of 4 schemes. One is the upgrade of an existing link between two estates. It's actually just looking at putting additional public lighting on it. That's between Ballyrandall there and Knocknagrana. Another one is is the creation of a new route between two green areas that are back to back. The third is a link and a pedestrian crossing into an existing estate, and the fourth is almost a back entrance into the Dungarvan Rugby Club. And I suppose when you look at those types of schemes into rugby clubs and those into clubs or GA clubs, soccer clubs, you'll find that on the other side of it, there's a huge amount of cars on a Saturday or Sunday morning dropping kids off, when some of those kids could actually be walking or cycling if there was a better route for them. A slightly bigger scheme here also in the Dungarvan Abbey side area, and you can see that what this scheme looks to do is it looks to create a better link between the GA club and the greenway itself through Tourneur Court. And I suppose when you look at the benefit of what this scheme has the potential to do, if you just look at the table on the bottom left there, you'll see Tourneur Court Abbeyside National School before the scheme 2,000 meters, after the scheme 1,100. But I suppose it's in the detail that you can see the benefit. That removes 600 meters of a cycle on the N25, which is a very, very heavily trafficked road, and places kids instead on 480 meters of a cycle track and the greenway. I suppose if you look at from White Strand to Abbeyside GA Club, it goes from 3,000 meters beforehand to 875 meters after, and again removing quite a significant amount of travel for a young person or cyclist or walker off of the N25. So you can see the benefits there in terms of safety and in terms of time. And where's the bigger picture for these small schemes? This is Tramore. I suppose we looked at it in detail in terms of where are the barriers in the residential zones, and you can see that there are huge opportunities in terms of creating these small linkages, and they can build up together to create this notion of this 10-15 minute town that will allow people to use active travel, walk or cycle to any service they want within 15 minutes. So how do you get these types of schemes up and running, or how do you get them considered? And there's an appropriate level of public consultation involved in all of them. And depending on the size of the project, I suppose you're looking at a non-statutory consultation through maybe the PPN or through residence groups or through letter drops, or you're looking at a Section 38 under the Roads Act, or on the bigger schemes, Part 8s. And it's dependent certainly on the size and scope of the scheme. And as part of the process, you're looking to get engagement, number one, as you can get strong engagement across the community, and you're trying to build a consensus for the scheme. Do the community want this? Do they see a benefit in it? And many local permeability schemes, they have been met with, I suppose, very, very strong opposition, and in particular schemes that look to open up new routes between abutting residential zones. And these in many ways are the ones that can show the greatest benefit, but also have the biggest challenges. They're schemes that they impact on green areas, they open up cul-de-sacs, etc. And I suppose one of the weaknesses we found is that very often our initial engagement with a community is the first time that a community has been contacted or even considered creating an alternative route from A to B, whatever that A or B might be. And what are the common themes, I suppose, we get back, and frequently there's almost a sense of horror, I suppose, in some corners when we might suggest a scheme. Antisocial behaviour is the primary one that comes at us, and these concerns are most acute for those who are near any proposed new entrants. The thoughts of teenagers or strangers and that children will use the route, it seems to outweigh or eliminate any benefit that the route might be to those actually living near it. Many schemes are perceived to make no difference, and many submissions state that the schemes are irrelevant or that they represent poor value for money, especially even if they're presented as part of a wider plan. Many people don't identify any personal benefit on it, only with a loss, which is a loss of privacy, etc. And this argument is particularly put forward if the services are already accessible from that community. So the community maybe that's benefiting least or has the most benefit towards existing services. Negative impact on house prices is one that has commonly come into us. Loss of privacy. I suppose it's a very understandable concern, and the benefits of a scheme to a community must outweigh this change in their environment. It often arises when the community raising the concerns already have access to certain services. So this issue comes to the fore even if a route is already being used informally, even if kids are already jumping a wall, etc. People don't see any benefit in formalising that or creating that into a formal pathway. Additional litter and dog litter, again, a very, very common issue that's raised. Strangers passing. This is linked to loss of privacy, obviously, but it's often raised as a concern for young families, and the fear that the proposed route would become a thoroughfare rather than what should be just a local convenience. And the loss of existing community is another one which I suppose I wouldn't have seen coming. And I suppose many people seem to identify very, very strongly with very local communities, such as their neighbours in a cul-de-sac, and don't necessarily identify themselves very strongly with a wider community. So how do we deal with some of these concerns? And it's not simple. And you know, they are real concerns. Like I suppose antisocial behaviour. I suppose on any scheme, all you can say really is that there is always the potential for antisocial behaviour. But there is also always the potential for social behaviour, and no one has ever, I suppose, come to us with that notion in the front of their heads. It tends to be the negative that comes to you. Is a cul-de-sac safer than a residential area where people are regularly passing by on foot? Studies would suggest it's not, that the footfall itself is a positive thing. Do walls keep people out from entering properties? Or do they just say something about how the people outside the walls should behave, as in you should not enter here because there's a wall? Is the wall the most effective way to keep somebody out or to keep yourself safe? Engineers will love the idea of designing things out, and look, I'm an engineer, but that's not always possible. It's not always possible to design out issues. It's not possible to design out antisocial behaviour. There is always the possibility that there will be some antisocial behaviour, as there is always the inevitability of social behaviour. You know, people will interact with one another. They'll get along. They won't get along. They'll have positive and negative relationships, and I suppose there's a potential for that in any change in environment. Loss of existing community. What is the size of a community? How do we want to engage with one another? What is a community? Is the notion of community flexible? They're not simple questions, and there isn't simple answers to them. So how do we deal with some of the concerns? I think there's certainly a requirement to look at behavioural change and attitude change, and what's the perceived size of a community, I think, is a very important one. In many cases, a larger size of community would the notion of a larger size of community would reframe some of the negative stuff that people tend to take on board, changing the view from people coming from outside in to us being connected to one another. And what are the local examples of good practice of these types of schemes? Do we have them? Do we have permeability already? What type of infrastructure is inside in that permeability? Have we got have we lit that permeability? Have we got good surfaces on those existing routes? And are they even seen as existing routes, or are they in a way invisible? And I suppose a question for a wider society is, why is it that antisocial behaviour, the presence of young people, passing strangers, and general security issues are so prevalent and strong issues when it comes to public engagement, particularly when we essentially have a low crime society? And finally, I suppose, you know, and this is relevant. The status quo in respect to travel and using cars, it won't hold into the future, and we can see that in terms of climate change, in terms of the cost of cars, the cost of carbon taxes, fuel prices, etc. And you know, would a better and more consistent national message in respect to how we see our transport infrastructure in the future, where does active travel sit in it, and what are the sustainable transport modes that we want to link to? You know, why is it that, you know, our first engagement, I suppose, with local communities is their first sight of this type of change? I think that's unhelpful, and I think as a nation, really, we probably need to look at a national awareness campaign or a national campaign that shows people the possibilities that active travel can bring. I suppose we look at these types of articles every week on climate change. You know, it's something that, you know, we can't ignore, I suppose, at this stage. I suppose people have to be, you know, people have to be able to see that link between these active travel programs and between their role in climate action. So if we have any comments or questions, certainly I think Ian probably has some bits and pieces there that have come in. I just want to tag those two references to the NTA's permeability research and case studies, and also the NTA's guide on best practice. I think permeability is a very important part of our program. We're very anxious to engage with people on it, and you can contact us there on activetravel@waterfordcountycouncil.ie. So thanks very much.